Welcome back, Metroid fans. The time has finally arrived for the review of Metroid Dread on this channel, and I have beaten it to 100% completion, and this is going to be my final thoughts on the game. And of course, we're going to be going deep into the history and the intricacies, and we will be discussing spoilers later on in this review, and that will be marked in the description and in the timestamps for this video. So I want to warn you guys about that right now. So Metroid Dread, the mythical game that may have never existed, does exist and is now finally out. And if you remember Metroid Prime 3, there was that scan talking about Metroid Dread, or Dread basically, in one of the scans. We want to make one thing clear about that lore about Metroid Dread in Metroid Prime 3 is that it was actually a scan of a space pirate missile turret that they were designing, and they called it Dread. Now, obviously it's very coincidental and quite possibly suspicious that Metroid Dread is actually the name of Metroid 5, and it was mentioned in Metroid Prime 3 just a few years after the game was talked about being in development as a Nintendo DS game. It then appeared in Metroid Prime 3, but Retro Studios later confirmed that they were just basically quote-unquote joking around with that reference. And obviously a space pirate missile turret doesn't have anything to do with Metroid Dread, the actual game, as we could tell from the actual game itself. There's no mention of the space pirates even in Metroid Dread. There's no turrets, nothing like that, but there are E.M.M.I robots. But these E.M.M.I robots, as was discussed in the opening of the story of Metroid Dread, what they do confirm is that these E.M.M.I robots were property and designed by the Galactic Federation to go and examine planet ZDR. So in terms of the lore, the E.M.M.I robots and Metroid Dread and the reference to Dread in that scan in Metroid Prime 3 has nothing to do with Metroid Dread. There's no connection there as far as the lore is concerned. But as far as the ideas of the producer and what he had in mind with that reference of Dread in Metroid Prime 3, that remains to be seen. That could be a hidden secret that they'll never admit to. But as far as the actual truth is concerned regarding that, we may never know the full story behind that Dread scan in Metroid Prime 3, and then of course Metroid Dread becoming an actual game. So that may end the lore right there, but we will have to wait and see. So Metroid Dread is the 5th mainline Metroid game. Metroid 5, it comes after Metroid Fusion, Super Metroid, Metroid Samus Returns, or also known as Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, and of course the original Metroid on the NES. Now when this game was revealed at E3 2021, all the Metroid fans yelled out basically in unison how excited they were for this game. They couldn't believe actually Metroid Dread was real and Metroid 5 was coming out, including myself. And this has quite a bit of history dating back to that 1994 mainline release on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Metroid, and followed up by Metroid Fusion in 2002, which was a full 8 years after that release on the Super Nintendo. And even though Metroid Fusion was loved by all Metroid fans pretty much, there was a difference in gameplay in comparison to Super Metroid, whereas Metroid Fusion was more of a linear experience, and there was some changes in terms of how Samus interacted with the environment and the SAX, which was basically the X-Parasites taking form of Samus as a predator type of character going up and trying to hunt down Samus in that game. So in that sense, it was a very different experience. So Metroid Dread comes 19 years later after Metroid Fusion, and during that time we've had Metroid Prime introduced, and we have to remind fans very clearly that Metroid Prime is a side story to the mainline Metroid game. It is not actually a mainline Metroid story. It is a side story spin-off series, Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3. And then you have Metroid Other M, which is also another spin-off game. And then you have Metroid Prime Federation Force, another spin-off game. And now finally we have Metroid Dread, which is the mainline Metroid 5. And the reason why Metroid fans were so excited to see this is because of what it meant for the future of the series being introduced on the Nintendo Switch. With the Nintendo Switch having the luxury of having such a large install base, and on top of that, an install base that was already introduced to many, and I mean many, Metroidvania type releases on the console thus far, countless 2D platformers from indie developers, countless Metroidvania type experiences, countless roguelike Metroidvania type experiences, you name it, the Nintendo Switch has had that type of experience on its console. And Nintendo has been very much promoting that type of gameplay on the Nintendo Switch. It's a portable system. Those type of games do lend itself very well to be playing on the go and on your TV. So leading up to the release of Metroid Dread, this was all very much playing in its favor heavily for this game to have the full backing of Nintendo and all the support from their marketing budget and all the support from their fans because of the audience that Nintendo already had built up to introduce this game on the console to be released this year. And the very interesting thing is that Nintendo introduced this game just 4 months before actually releasing it. But the fans and the people who love Metroid were so ready for this game, including myself. We've waited so many years for a mainline full Metroid game. But there was a big elephant in the room for Metroid Dread since the beginning, before they even revealed the game, and that was the question of how Nintendo was going to market and reveal and show this game and sell this game to people who never played a Metroid game before. Because even though Metroid and Super Metroid and you got Castlevania games, they've all had a part in inventing this genre of Metroidvania, it doesn't necessarily mean that Metroidvania-like experiences means that this is Metroid. Metroid, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid in general, those games are still very much different experiences than your typical platforming experience, 2D side-scroller, or Metroidvania with a map. These are very, very different experiences that have to be shown in a certain way and marketed a certain way to get people interested. And that's exactly what Nintendo did here with Metroid Dread, and I think it was extremely successful. I've seen so many people talking about this game, so many outstanding positive reviews, people excited to play this game, many fans, including yourselves, watching this channel, watching this video even. Quite possibly, this is your first Metroid game. In fact, I've seen many of you reply to me in my comments that this was going to be your first Metroid game, and obviously you probably already been playing it, and it is your first Metroid game. And I've seen quite a bit of response just from the first week from the release of this game that people absolutely love it and they can't believe what they've been missing out on for so many years. Now with Metroid 1 and 2 on the NES and Game Boy, Nintendo set the stage for Super Metroid, which was going to become Nintendo's crowning achievement on the Super Nintendo for exploring and platforming, and the entire Metroidvania genre even existing was basically due in large part to Super Metroid. So ever since the reveal of Metroid Dread, my big desire and hope for the series was that Metroid Dread was going to be something like a brand new version of a Super Metroid. Basically a sequel to Super Metroid, even though it is technically a direct sequel to Metroid Fusion. However, like I said, I do prefer the gameplay aspects of Super Metroid over Metroid Fusion because of the wide open map and all the exploring you get to do in Super Metroid and the backtracking, and everything is done so well in that game. It set the stage like we talked about. So I was hoping of more of that and less of Fusion, even though Fusion was great. So what happened is that Nintendo took the best elements of Metroid Fusion and they combined them with Super Metroid from the SNES, while also at the same time improving on almost every aspect of that formula to create Metroid Dread. And this of course was in the hands of Mercury Steam, who did the development of this game with the oversight of Nintendo. So suffice to say, Metroid Dread had huge shoes to fill, and I was just hoping as a fan that the game was going to be really good and marketed well enough to bring Metroid into a certain limelight to give it enough sales so the series would even survive longer in the first place. And of course would then help the series further expand with future games that have already been announced, like Metroid Prime 4, which is extremely important for the Metroid series and Metroid Prime series to continue, is for that game to sell in the future. But we can't even get to that game, Metroid Prime 4, until we get to Metroid Dread and get the series back on track and back even alive in the spotlight, since the previous games that were released up until Metroid Dread have not sold particularly well, and the entire Metroid series, in my point of view at least, has been in danger of going on an extremely long hiatus, or even Nintendo stopping making games in the series for many, many years now. It's always been a slight worry of mine because of that fact, with the games not selling as much as their big mainline franchise like Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong. So as Metroid Dread drew closer to release, I was anticipating it more and more and more, but also I found myself looking at less and less information and footage about the game. I would tweet things out, of course, about it, but I wanted to see the least amount of information on the game as possible so I could go into the experience being basically treated like a brand new Metroid game, like it should be, without knowing way too much about how the game played or what the story was. And as many of you know, I was able to actually play the game for the very first time on stream live on this channel back on launch night, which was a great experience for me. But I did go back and actually restart the game after that stream from the beginning because I wanted to have that personal connection and uninterrupted experience with Metroid Dread, which I felt it deserved my full attention without having to worry about dealing with the chat or, live stream setup basically. But the overall experience with Metroid games like Super Metroid, for example, Metroid Prime, has always been a very personal, deep experience, best experienced, mind you, by yourself, in isolation, perhaps with the lights off, just immersing yourself in the experience and enjoying every bit of the game as possible, because that's exactly how the game presents itself. The game presents itself in a way that isolates the player, isolates Samus in her environment so you can explore and even be scared a bit by the things that you're facing. And that's where Metroid Dread comes in with its gameplay. Metroid Dread's gameplay is the cutting edge of 2D platforming perfection. The most perfect playing 2D side-scrolling game I've ever played. And this, mind you, was coming into the fact where I was actually worried about the game not having D-pad control options, because up to that point I had always played Metroid games with the D-pad and not an analog stick. So I had some concern with Metroid Dread being locked to the analog stick with this game, even though that's what Mercury Steam did with the 3DS version of Samus Returns. It had the circle pad was the way you controlled Samus, but for Metroid Dread I was very much hoping there would be a control option to swap the analog stick with the D-pad, just for that pinpoint tapping movement that you get with platformers when you do that. However, what was so interesting about the choice that they did for the controls for Metroid Dread is that since they put the analog stick as the main control for moving Samus, it also allowed them to implement perfect aiming controls with the analog stick with Samus when you're still and holding the L button. So when you hold the L button in Metroid Dread, you're able to aim in full 360 degrees, which of course comes with many different upgrades to the missiles and to her beams themselves. But after about an hour of playing the game, it did start to make perfect sense as to why the controls were the way they were on Metroid Dread. And it's very interesting too how Mercury Steam and Nintendo cleverly hid some of the abilities of the controls when you looked at the control options when you start the game. When you start the game up, you look at the controller and you notice that the A button is blank. There is no control option for the A button, which I thought was kind of strange when I first played the game, because usually on these Nintendo first party IPs, every single button is used, but the A button wasn't used. But then of course, come to find out the A button was used quite a bit later on with a certain move called the flash shift, which is basically a dash move, and that's what you use the A button for a lot. And not to mention, you use the A button to go through all the menus and to accept, text on the screen. The A button is used quite a bit, but it was very interesting how they hit it in the first part of the game there, basically hiding some abilities so it didn't spoil it for you. But quite honestly, they already showed that ability in many of the previews, and they talked about it already in the Dread report. So personally for me, I didn't think that was much of a spoiler, hiding that ability from the controller. But getting back to the controls in Metroid Dread, they must have spent many hours, months, years, what have you, perfecting the overall weight of Samus's character when you jump, and there's not any slightly extra momentum involved. You simply just jump from place to place to place, and there's pinpoint accuracy in the jumps. They did an outstanding job in developing the platforming characteristics of Samus to fit perfectly with the environments. Those kind of things to nail in a platformer are harder than they may appear, but you'd be surprised when you play other platforming games how much of a difference it can be when the character you're controlling has like extra momentum when they land, or they're just too heavy and weighty when you jump. It makes all the difference in the world to nail that just right so you don't have any issues with the controls when you're jumping from platform to platform. Not to mention wall jumping, which is executed perfectly in Metroid Dread, far better than Super Metroid. I'm pleased to say it's extremely easy to do the wall jump in Metroid Dread. You simply just hold right or left on the stick as you jump right or left, and Samus will wall jump off it just like you would any other type of game, but this does it to the greatest degree with pinpoint accuracy, much better than most of the games that do the wall jumping. It is just done extremely well and it's extremely smooth. Samus gets her usual arsenal of weapons that you'd expect in a Metroid game. You have the morph ball, you have the morph bomb, you have the charge beam, you have the missile, you got the super missile, you got the ice missile. All the main standout upgrades of a Metroid game are in this game, with a bunch of new upgrades as well that Nintendo basically talked about in their own footage of the game and their Metroid Dread reports. So overall, the new abilities for Samus are quite extensive, and not only that, but the old abilities as well, like from Super Metroid, have been expanded upon and actually improved upon, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the video. Metroid Dread's gameplay though, like I said, fantastic design, outstandingly executed, but the big star of the show, of course, for this new Metroid game is the E.M.M.I robots. Now, these robots are basically security robots that are assigned to specific areas in each of the levels in Metroid Dread, and each E.M.M.I, while even though they look very similar to one another, they are designed differently in how you're supposed to approach them in their gameplay scenario. And I have to give Mercury's team a lot of credit. They designed the E.M.M.I sections almost like a brand new different game from the main sections. Now, that's nothing to be afraid of if you're a Metroid player. It's simply that these sections are enclosed and you have to run for your life and either go hide from them while they pass you or simply run to the next room before they catch you. Either way, you are not safe if you are in the room alone with the E.M.M.I. You are supposed to feel uneasy and afraid and obviously not wanting to be in the same place as these robots because they will kill Samus in one hit. Now, thankfully, the game is very forgiving in the aspect that if you do get killed by an E.M.M.I, the game will spawn you outside of the door that you entered into the same room with that E.M.M.I. So even though it's a one-hit kill, you do get another chance pretty much right away. And when they do catch you, it does give you a 1-frame split second to press the counter button, which is the X button, to escape the grasp of the E.M.M.I. Now, I said that right. It is 1 frame. So the chances of that being pulled off correctly and each and every time by you is highly unlikely, but you likely will be able to pull it off at least a few times, and it will save you from being killed in that moment. Sometimes it is very useful because if you're right next to an exit and you pull off an escape from an E.M.M.I and you exit the room, you are then safe. So it can vary on where you do get caught, but if you do get caught in those situations, you do have the very slight chance to escape, which is good that they did that. And each E.M.M.I robot that you face does need to be killed basically in the same way, as in the way you actually destroy the E.M.M.Is with your weapon that they give you from these big security drones that just are basically in certain rooms, and you destroy them and you charge up your Omega cannon, and then that allows you to shoot and kill the E.M.M.Is with that cannon, and you do it the same way for each and every one of the E.M.M.Is, which was slightly disappointing when I found out that that was the case. However, I don't think it really detracts too much from the gameplay because the encounters themselves when you're running away from the E.M.M.Is are all pretty much different and they're all laid out differently for you. Each of these robots are pretty much the same type of robot that you need to kill. They just have certain abilities that are stronger than others. Some are faster, some have better sensing abilities for sound, things like that. So even though they are basically the same type of robots that you will encounter, the way you go about getting away from them is the main draw of those encounters. And you do absolutely need to destroy those robots, those E.M.M.Is, to advance in the game. There is no way to skip them if you're thinking about skipping them. So that is definitely where the dread comes in, and there's something that keeps coming up and you have to keep facing each and every level in the game. So that is something that is actually really fun to do, and even though it may seem frustrating to die quite a bit against the E.M.M.Is, since it is so forgiving on where it places you after dying and it's a very quick loading screen, I don't think many people will have too much problem with it, and they'll just find a way to get away from them as soon as possible and then move on to the next area. Now, when Metroid Dread was first revealed, I had hoped that the E.M.M.Is would have different form factors when you face them in later parts of the game. So as a aesthetic point of view, the E.M.M.Is are pretty much your basic type of robot, spider-looking creature. And you know, you've seen those types of robots in many different types of sci-fi movies in the past. It is admittedly kind of a basic generic type of robot design. That's just something that maybe they could have designed a little bit with more flash or a little bit of differences more in the actual robots themselves. But overall, I would say the E.M.M.I implementation into Metroid Dread was very well done, and I would definitely want to do it again in a future Metroid game, perhaps with a different type of creature or a different way that they would approach it, having that dread or basically the fear of you being trapped or being pursued by some type of hunter creature. I definitely wouldn't be opposed to them doing it again in the next Metroid game, Metroid 6 for example. Now, what about the level design in Metroid Dread? How does that actually play out in comparison to previous Metroid games in the series? Well, I'm happy to report on that. Metroid Dread's level design is absolutely top tier fantastic. It is the best Metroidvania, you want to say. This is Metroid, right? So it is the best design I've ever seen in any type of these games. So the map design, the layout, the structure of each area, how they're connected on the map themselves, how the elevator system works, how the teleportation system works. It is absolutely designed to perfection in Metroid Dread. I couldn't believe actually just how amazingly designed it was. And it's not just in how the actual levels look, like graphically, because graphically it looks very, very good. The art style is great, but we'll get into that in a second. But the actual design structure of the levels is absolutely amazing. It must have taken them years to design the actual levels in this game. And it makes a lot of sense that Mercury Stein's last main game released was in fact Metroid Samus Returns in 2017. It's been 4 years now since the release of that game, and it shows with the quality of design of these levels. These levels are designed in a way that take advantage of absolutely every aspect of the quote-unquote Metroidvania formula that people are aware of to the 9th degree. So in Metroid Dread, the levels are designed so that Samus can interact with them perfectly, so that when she moves through a level into the next area, they actually design multiple parts of the map so that they connect in a way where you can use Samus's abilities to your advantage by actually using the next area in connection with the previous area of the map, so you can actually get a certain item. So you can actually plan from the previous room, for example, into the next room with certain abilities and use those abilities to get the item in the next room, even though when you're in the room itself, that certain secret may not be apparent unless you're using the ability from the previous room into the next room. And that type of gameplay design is something that is extremely well thought out in this game, and they do it in just about every single level in Metroid Dread to perfection. So many times in side-scrolling games do developers just focus on a single room and then you move on to the next room. But in Metroid Dread, it's being treated like an entire level, all connected in separate rooms, but it's all being treated as one room. So you have the entire level basically in front of you, even though you're only seeing one part of the map. The way it's designed is actually one big map all in one. It's just the view that the player has is obstructed because you can only see so much on the screen. That's how they designed the gameplay to interact with that aspect of everything being one cohesive level or world, basically, that you can traversal through. And this entire idea of connecting all these things together, of course, was taken from Super Metroid and other Metroid games, but the way they did it in Metroid Dread is taken just that much farther to the next level, and it's done so smoothly and effortlessly here that it must be pointed out as being something truly amazing in its game design. Now, as far as the graphics are concerned in Metroid Dread, I'm playing it with the E.M.M.I Classic cable adapter for HDMI upscaling. So when I played it on my 4K monitor, as you're seeing in this footage here that I recorded from the E.M.M.I Classic, the game looks really good. Very clean, very smooth graphics. Lots of great details in the background that you can see when you walk through the level. There's a big sense of depth on these levels, especially when you're in caves or underwater, that just immerses you even further into experience. And that applies for all the levels in the game. There's lots of fine little details. And in Metroid Dread, this game offers you a little bit of everything. So you name it, you got it. If you want a certain type of level in Metroid Dread, this game probably has it for you, and you're gonna like it, I guarantee it. Metroid Dread does a great job of trying to make longtime fans of the series happy in its level design, but also to draw in new players as well, with how much variety there is to the gameplay while still sticking true to its core formula of gameplay. I think it's just a fantastic design game from top to bottom, graphically, controls, gameplay, enemy design, all those things. And of course, the bosses, right? The bosses in Metroid games, and I'm not talking about the E.M.M.Is, for example. The E.M.M.Is, I think, are separate from the overall mainline Metroid bosses in each of these levels. I think the bosses in Metroid Dread are just fantastic, and I realize some people out there have said these bosses might be too hard. But really, each of the bosses that you face in Metroid Dread, even though they may seem very hard at first, they all have very set patterns that you need to follow. And once you learn each of their patterns, of course, you will be able to beat these bosses without much problem. And I say not much problem because as long as you have a comfort level with the controls in the first place, you should be doing just fine on these bosses. But also you got to keep an eye out on certain cues that they put forth in each boss encounter, because if you don't pay attention to all their patterns, you're going to probably die each and every time, because the game wants you to play it the way it's designed to be played. So it wants you to play in a certain way. It doesn't want you to play in your way, but each boss wants you to play in the way that they want you to play, because they're going to force you to, because if you don't, you will die. That's a guarantee. So learn the patterns, get comfortable with the controls, first of all, and always remember that when you do face a boss, think about which item you just picked up that was brand new, because most likely that next boss you face is going to require you to use that new ability you just got. So always keep that in mind, and you will be successful in Metroid Dread with its bosses. On top of that, the bosses themselves are just awesome design bosses. They're very, very fun to fight. And I will say this, that almost each boss, as far as I can tell, does in fact have more than one way to defeat them. So keep an eye out, like I said, for those visual cues, and then maybe on a second or third or fourth playthrough, since this game is highly replayable, you could then defeat these bosses with alternate methods, and it's very, very fun. So next up, we're going to be getting more into the spoiler territory with not only the story, but some of these abilities, because I want to give you some helpful hints and tips on what you can do to actually help yourself be able to get 100% on this game in the completion, because some of these things are really difficult if you don't learn how to do the maneuvers to get these certain items that are required to get that 100% completion in Metroid Dread. So what we're going to talk about is the boost and the shine spark ability for Samus in Metroid Dread. Now, the speed boost is something that obviously makes you a lot faster, and you're able to run really fast. If you hold left or hold right on the left analog stick and then press inwards, one click on it and hold it, you will be able to run at a super speed with Samus in a speed boost. She'll start revving up and then go really fast, and she'll continue running in that boost of speed for as long as you can have an opening in front of you. But also what they added that many people didn't realize is that they added the ability for you to slide while you're doing the speed boost, which then in turn adds all different types of puzzles that are introduced to that speed boost by having the slide maneuver in there. And lots of areas that you think are not possible to get to are now possible if you do have this speed boost and use it in conjunction with the slide maneuver. Now you're going to come across these blocks that have the speed boost icon on them, and when you do, you'll know that you're going to need to have that speed boost activated while you're running and going through that area in order to break those blocks. However, some of the blocks are going to confuse you because they're going to be in places that you think are just impossible to reach. Like they're going to be in like high up areas where there's no place to run, and you're thinking to yourself, well, how am I supposed to get to that area? I can't boost over there. I can only run left and right. So what am I supposed to do? Well, that's where the shine spark comes in. What it is energy that is stored from the speed boost into Samus's body. And how to accomplish this is that you activate the speed boost, then while running at a fast speed, you press directional down on the analog stick really fast. Samus will immediately stop, and then she'll start glowing purple because all that energy was just stored into her body. And you have 5 seconds until that energy disperses and Samus turns back to normal. During those 5 seconds of time while that energy is stored in Samus's body and it's glowing purple, you have the ability to do a shine spark, which then allows Samus to basically at that point turn into some kind of a rocket, pretty much, where you can dash all the way across the screen at super speed in a single line direction. So once you activate a shine spark, all you do at that point is that you hold the B button down, and then Samus will start charging up this move, and then you have the ability to push in any direction 360 degrees of where you want Samus to blast off to at that point. And that is exactly the key in how you're able to get those certain upgrades by using the shine spark in areas that you don't think are possible. But on top of that, you're able to use the shine spark with the screw attack, and you're able to use the shine spark as the morph ball. One key thing to remember is that you have that 5 seconds. You can do anything you want with Samus as long as you don't press that B button by itself. If you press the B button solo by itself without pressing the analog stick in any direction, she would then do the Shine Spark burst at that point, and you lost your Shine Spark. So the best way to do it if you're trying to get one of those items is to activate the speed boost, then activate the Shine Spark, and then you're able to control Samus in any way you want as long as you don't press that B button by itself. You can run, you can jump, you can even shoot your gun, you can do anything you want for 5 seconds. And before that 5 seconds is up, what you want to do is have that last second chance basically to do the burst move with the Shine Spark so you can get the item you're trying to get. And that's exactly the key that you need to follow when you're trying to get these items. And another tip I want to bring out as well, when you combine the jump screw attack with the speed boost at the same time, the game allows you to launch at a super speed across the screen, destroying all the blocks in its path while using the speed boost and screw attack together. Now, some people have had difficulty keeping the speed boost screw attack going and while in midair, but the key thing to remember to keep that spin and that super speed going for boost mode while you're in the air is to not touch the analog stick while you're in the air. As soon as you touch the analog stick in either right or the left direction, Samus's momentum will stop and you'll just be spinning in the air like normal, like a normal screw attack, and you'll lose your speed boost. So once you activate speed boost and jump with the screw attack, you have that super screw attack speed of being able to break through those barriers and walls while you're doing that. So as long as you keep tapping B in that moment and not touching the analog stick, you'll be just fine to continue that motion for as long as possible. Sometimes you will lose it. If you hit the wall for too long, she'll fall down and you have to do it over again. But for the most part, you can keep it going for quite a long time and continue using that speed boost and screw attack together to get where you want to go. Also, another tip to keep in mind is that these items that require using the Shine Spark and Speed Boost, there are multiple ways to get these items, and I'm going to show you some of those ways in this video as kind of like a tip, for you to follow. Now keep in mind though, just because I'm showing you this does not mean that they're easy to do necessarily. Some are very easy to do, no doubt, but some of these maneuvers require a lot of patience and a lot of practice to get the right feel for them. Just because they look easy to do on screen doesn't mean they're actually that easy to pull off in the game without a lot of practice. And another thing to keep in mind as well is that you can do things the hard way or the easy way with these Shine Spark items that you're required to get. There is usually an easier variation to get some of these items. When I did my first 100% playthrough, I, unfortunately for me that is, did everything the hard way, and it took me a lot longer to get some of these items, but it was very, very satisfying, I must admit, to be able to accomplish some of these moves that I was able to do, because they're really not easy, to be honest with you. But once you get the hang of it, it becomes an amazing move to use. The Speed Boost and Shine Spark ability in Metroid Dread may now have become my favorite ability to use in any Metroid game. After such practice and time spent doing it, it has become something that is really, really enjoyable. Like I said, it may be frustrating at first for you guys to do it, and it's definitely not required to beat the game to use, but it's very, 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 very satisfying to use to get that 100% completion rating. So now we come to the big spoilers of Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread, what a game. What a game. Amazing game. Fantastic gameplay, fantastic level design. All the great things that make a Metroid game fantastic, Metroid Dread has. But what about the story? Now, Metroid hasn't really been known for its story. But in Metroid Dread, the story is a very, very important part. This marks the end of the Metroid saga, basically, for this part of the story for Samus. Obviously, this is spoilers, so hopefully those of you who are watching this or listening to this have already seen this part of the game and are wanting to listen to the discussion part of it. So Samus basically goes to planet ZDR to investigate the reappearance, supposedly, of the X-Parasite, and when she lands, she gets attacked by a mysterious Chozo, and this Chozo actually is named Ravenbeak, and he is leader of the Makin tribe of the Chozo, which is a warrior tribe of the Chozo that killed the Thoa tribe, which is a scientist tribe of the Chozo. And the cool thing about the Thoa is that they are actually the ones that could control the Metroids. Now the Makin tribe, which was led by Ravenbeak, wanted to take control of the Metroids, so in order to do that they had to take control of the Thoa tribe. So the Galactic Federation put the E.M.M.I down on planet ZDR to investigate where this X-Parasite was, or if it was even on the planet, and in the midst of that, Ravenbeak went to planet ZDR and hacked the E.M.M.I robots and commanded them to take Samus's Metroid Metroid DNA so that he could then actually create Metroids on his own and have complete control of the galaxy at that point. But along the way, during Samus's adventure here on planet ZR, she comes in contact with a Chozo by the name of Quiet Robe, who then actually helps Samus out and tells her what is going on with the situation. And Quiet Robe reveals that he was part of the Thoa tribe and a scientist who was being forced to help Ravenbeak take control of the X-Parasites and of course Samus getting the DNA so he could create his own Metroids. So he tells her all these things about what's going on with Ravenbeak, and then Quiet Robe turns off some of the E.M.M.Is in order to help Samus get an easier path to go and defeat Ravenbeak in their final confrontation. But along the way there, one of the X-Parasites infects Quiet Robe and possesses his body, basically takes control of him, and then using him they reactivate the remaining E.M.M.I robots to go after Samus. So then Samus is then attacked by an E.M.M.I at that point, and because she's in such great danger and close to death, she suddenly becomes filled with this big power surge, and then she takes the energy from the E.M.M.I itself, and the E.M.M.I is left powerless. And then she goes and talks to Adam, the AI computer, and then Adam tells her that Samus has now basically become a Metroid, and the Chozo DNA that she got when she was a child was actually both from the scientist Chozo DNA with the Thoa and from the Makin DNA Chozo, which means that she has two separate DNAs from the Chozo inside of her, which was a huge revelation here in this game. But it also explains her extreme intellect and her extreme physical strength, having both sides of the DNA inside her body. And apparently being on planet ZR and being attacked by all these different X-Parasites has awakened all this DNA inside of her. Because remember, she's a human that now has Metroid DNA that was put in her from Metroid Fusion, and now she found out that she actually has Chozo DNA from two separate tribes, the scientist tribe, the Thoa, and the Makin tribe, the warrior tribe, that was put inside of her when she was a child. This is something brand new that she never knew. So combining three different DNAs and her human DNA is changing her into something else. She's having a metamorphosis, basically. So Samus finally then fights the leader of the Makin tribe, which of course is Ravenbeak. At the very end of the game, they have an amazing battle, and of course that boss fight is awesome. I think it's one of the best boss fights, maybe the best boss fight of any Metroid game in Metroid history. I think it's basically at the top of the list. I can't think of anything better. Maybe the original Metroid Prime boss from Metroid Prime 1 might be a little bit better or more exciting, but it's kind of hard to top that one. However, before Samus fights Ravenbeak, he reveals to her that technically he is her father, because he reveals that he was the one that donated his DNA from the Makin tribe to Samus as a child. Even though she didn't know it, and even though her real parents of course were human who were killed by the space pirates when she was a very small child, the DNA she got was in fact from Ravenbeak, from the Makin tribe, and from the Thoa tribe, which she already knew about. So Ravenbeak actually defeats Samus in this battle and thinks that he killed her or puts her to sleep, but then Samus basically awakens and metamorphoses into a Metroid type of creature, or has Metroid type of armor then covering her body that takes the place of the power suit. So it's almost like a Metroid power suit that covers her body. I'm not 100% sure if she was actually Metroid creature herself, or if that was just a power suit covering her that looked like a Metroid. It's not really explained exactly in the game, but it looks that way. It looks like she is a Metroid, but there's also like that suit, an organic suit that covers her at the same time. It's very interesting. So as this super powered Metroid, she then of course kills Ravenbeak basically with no problem, and then it's time to escape the planet and races to her ship. But before she leaves the planet, she's met one last time by Quiet Robe. Quiet Robe is actually still infected with the X-Parasite, but he's still able to communicate with her at that point. Samus then allows him to infect her because he has the X parasite. So he then goes inside of her body. And what happens at that point makes a lot of sense, because the X parasite can then stabilize the Metroid/Chozo DNA that's already inside of Samus. And all that combined together actually makes Samus revert back to her normal self. Having all those separate types of DNA and parasites inside of her, she finally can act and be normal in that moment, and is able to escape on the ship and blast off before the planet explodes. So that is a huge, crazy occurrence in Metroid Dread, and I'm very, very curious to see what happens in Metroid 6, because obviously Samus has been through a lot of changes in her body, and who knows what else is going on with her after that. It's going to be very, very interesting to see. But there is some pretty interesting things that happen in Metroid Dread. Like, for example, Adam the AI is talking to Samus throughout the entire game through each level, giving her advice on what she needs to do next and giving her the danger assessment of the area. And then come to find out, before she faces Ravenbeak in the last area of the game, he actually reveals himself to be Adam, the AI robot, the one controlling what he's saying to her. But the interesting thing is that after she kills Ravenbeak and she's back in her ship right before she leaves, and before Quiet Robe goes inside of her body, Adam the AI is back again and warns her that she's going to drain the energy of the ship if she touches it and blasts off with it. So it's never really explained very clearly in the game, but my assumption is that Ravenbeak was taking remote control of the Adam AI from his base and basically speaking through that computer AI to Samus with the voice of Adam the AI. It's just not very clear as to when the AI is actually under that control by Ravenbeak. It doesn't really say, but I'm assuming basically for the entire game it was under Ravenbeak's control. So when you're talking to Adam the AI during Metroid Dread, it seems like that is actually Ravenbeak simply talking to you and leading you on, because Ravenbeak's goal was to bring out more and more power from Samus, basically testing her throughout the entire game, all those different areas, so he can see the true power of Samus and the Metroid DNA that she had inside of her. So that's my interpretation of it anyway. But yeah, that's the story of Metroid Dread right there, and it is really, really well done. I think it's a very good direction for the Metroid series. Obviously now that does close the actual Metroids themselves, I guess, from being in future Metroid games. However, they can always bring Metroids back in some form, because the last Metroid is actually Samus Aran herself. So any DNA from her could actually be made into a Metroid later in the future, but Samus herself is actually Metroid. Samus Aran is the Metroid series. That is simply an amazing way to end that certain aspect of the series and continuing forward to continue the Metroid name for future games. It is a perfect way to actually do that in this story. So overall, guys, I think this was a fantastic game. I do, at the very end of the day, think that this is the best Metroid game of any 2D Metroid game in the history of the series. I think it is even better than Super Metroid. It does so many things well. The controls are amazing. It controls a lot better than Super Metroid. Obviously, it's much newer. It's refined. The level design is better than Super Metroid. It's just a better game than Super Metroid. But before we end this review, there are two very small criticisms I have of this game, and that would be the music simply not being quite as good as previous Metroid games. It's very good. There are some very standout tracks in the game, but overall they do use remixes of old songs from Super Metroid, for example, and a lot of the new tracks simply aren't as memorable as those older games are as well. However, that's not to say it's not good. I do think there are some very standout tracks in Metroid Dread, and overall the quality of them is very, very good. And another slight nitpick I have is the hand-holding or tutorial, so to speak, in the early part of the game. The game actually stops you quite a bit throughout the first 20-25 minutes of the game, and you're being explained a lot of things about how to play the game and a lot of things about the map and, you know, certain things about the environment. But it's very forgivable because the game hasn't been played before, the Metroid series, by basically many millions of people, and this is many people's very first Metroid game, so that makes a lot of sense, so I can forgive that. But for me as a Metroid veteran, it was a little bit annoying that first few parts of the game, because you couldn't skip those things that it was forcing you to see for its tutorials, basically. So those are some minor things, but overall this is a legendary, fantastic, amazing quadruple A experience game. As for how good it is as a 2D platformer Metroidvania experience, this is the best there ever was. Like, there is nothing better than this game. Metroid Dread is the best 2D Metroidvania game in the history of Metroidvania. And there you have it. This is it, guys. It's amazing. If I were to rate it on that standpoint, this game is definitely a 10 out of 10. It's fantastic. Is it my favorite Metroid game of all time? Well, my favorite Metroid game of all time still is Metroid Prime as of right now, but this game is new, right? So Metroid Prime became my favorite Metroid game over years' time. So this is extremely close to being my favorite Metroid game. I just not quite sure if I want to give up that right to Metroid Prime just yet, but we shall see, because this game has left quite a mark on the entire gaming landscape going forward. I think it is just a fantastic, amazing game. We shall see how time tells with as far as, you know, how much I think this is going to be my favorite Metroid game of all time. And who knows, for that it may just come down to the music part, because obviously the music in Metroid Prime is way more memorable and epic than Metroid Dread is. But that's besides the point really overall. This doesn't take away anything really from how great Metroid Dread is. It is a just amazing game, guys. If you haven't bought it already and you're still watching this video, go out and buy it as soon as possible. Support this game. Games like this deserve your money. It deserves every bit of that $60. It's replayable. You can play it multiple times, and you can even speed run it, or you can do sequence breaks, things like that. This game has way more to it than just one playthrough. It is just a fantastic Metroid experience. And if you're not a Metroid fan yet, but you like Metroidvania games, play this game and you're probably most likely going to now be a Metroid fan if you do play a Metroid Dread. And if you like other games like it on the Switch, or know anything about Metroid, again, go ahead and buy it. It's a safe bet that you're going to love Metroid Dread. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching and listening to this review of Metroid Dread. Very in-depth, very long, but it was well worth the wait for this game, and I'm so excited to finally have it. And next up, after this, the next game for Metroid is probably going to be Metroid Prime 4. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, can't wait for that. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.